Hey everyone, we're doing another species spotlight today, and today we're working with a really cool species that I actually haven't gotten to work with too much, and that is the Woma python. So as before, I had mentioned that I had these for quite a while in quarantine, but now I have them in the main snake room, so I get to work with them quite a bit more. So we're just going to get right into it, talking about this really cool snake species. So the Woma python, found throughout central and western Australia. They are sometimes called the Ramsay's python, sometimes called the sand python, or sometimes just the Woma. And I believe in Australia, which I'm probably going to get a little flack from, but I'm doing my best here, is they actually pronounce it Woma python in Australia. So Woma python is how you'd probably hear that being spoken in Australia. But either way, these are an amazing species of snake. So these guys are one of two species belonging to the genus Aspidites. In Latin, Aspidites basically means shield bearer, which is in reference to, turn your head please, these very large scales on the top of their head, kind of shiny, similar to like the Lampropeltis, that means like shield belly. That's the very shiny, large, iridescent scales on the top of their heads. Their coloration can be very variable, especially throughout their range. But essentially, these guys are found in the more arid, deserty types of landscapes of the continent of Australia, where the blackheads, being the other species of Aspidites, are usually found in a little bit more tropical areas. These guys' body shape is very similar to that of, like, say, an African or a Central Asian boa, to where their heads are very round with a little narrow point to the top. They have smaller eyes, and they're a little bit farther up the head, which is alluding to essentially their biology is meant for them to be very fossorial, or they spend a lot of time underground. Which, if you go out to the middle of central Australia and you go out to that red dirt desert, which is why a lot of their coloration is those earth tones like this, is to kind of blend in with that. You will find them mostly at night, fairly nocturnal. And then during the day, they'll be in burrows underground, or they'll be under fallen trees or in logs. So that's actually where they spend a good amount of their time. And when they are hunting for food, they will oftentimes go into those burrows underground, where they're spending a good majority of their time, hence their biology. They're a pretty small sized python as far as python goes. And honestly, there's a lot of really weird things about these animals as far as pythons go. So as I said before, they're a little bit small, things considered. They're usually about 4.5 to 5.5 feet long. They rarely exceed 6 feet, but larger ones have been documented, especially in the southern part of the range. There have been a couple that have actually exceeded 8 feet, but that is a monster. They don't happen very often, but this is a good size. This is our female. So, she's probably, come here. Ooh, what do you think? Probably about 5 feet maybe from nose to tail. So a good sized little animal. She's still putting back on weight from when she had eggs. She didn't like to go right back on food very well. But that actually brings me to the next thing. So as we said before, they're going into burrows and stuff looking for food. Woma pythons and all of the Aspidites, so the blackheads too, are generalists as far as their diet goes. So they'll eat kind of anything. But they are very well-known and well-documented reptile eaters. They eat a lot of lizards and even a lot of snakes. In fact, they are one of the more documented species of cannibals of their snakes. They very often predate each other. No one's not entirely sure as to why that is, but it actually makes sense about some more of their biology, why they are reptile hunters. So if you look at the head of the Womas, you can see that there are no facial pits that are present in most or pretty much all python species, as well as there's the labial pits of the pit vipers like rattlesnakes and things. Woma pythons and blackhead pythons don't have those facial pits, so theoretically they're not using heat to go find their prey. Although they have recently done a study where there is a small scale at the front of their rostral scale, which is the front one on the underside, although she's being really good, that it might actually have a little bit of heat and temperature sensitivity and reactivity. So there might be what is essentially a very primitive form of that temperature and heat recognition at the very front of their face. They do eat rodents, they do eat ground birds, so they do eat warm-blooded animals, but they also do heavily eat reptiles. And again, so talking about weird stuff for them being pythons, so they are pythons, they are constrictors, but some of their feeding habits are a little off. So when, again, they're underground a lot, so they go into an animal burrow looking for a reptile or a small mammal. A lot of times those burrows are very narrow that don't allow them to fully grab a hold of that prey item and coil them up and constrict them to then eat. What happens a lot of times is that they are so narrow, they will grab a hold, and then sometimes they'll only get like just one coil length of their body and kind of press it up against the wall. And so when that happens, a lot of times you'll see older, larger, mature animals with a lot of scars and scratches along their face and along their bodies, because of what happens is they do that, and then that doesn't immediately get that animal and subdue it quickly, so there's a struggle and they end up getting scratched up a lot, which is why in the hobby we do a lot of frozen thawed meals, because a larger prey animal can hurt or really inflict a lot of damage or injury to your pet reptile. But overall, these guys are an amazing snake. They've honestly been a staple in the hobby for decades. They've just been never quite as popular as a lot of the other animals. Obviously, because they don't really have morphs, they have a lot of really cool and interesting patterns. A lot of variations, as I said before. They can be more yellow, they can be more red, they can be darker, lighter. As far as I know, I don't think there are any morphs, at least in the States. There might be some in Australia and maybe over in Europe, where more of them were exported, legally or not, to Europe than they were to the United States, and so they have a little bit of a larger population to work with. But I'm not sure, I couldn't find 100% sure that there were in fact genetic morphs, just a lot of variation and really cool lines. What are you doing, silly little girl? In captivity, these guys do very well. They have amazing prey responses and food responses. So essentially it's almost like keeping a larger king snake, where you'll know from a lot of other YouTube videos and content creators, you'll see the Woma and the blackheads just like flying out of the cage to grab that. These guys, she did lay eggs, which is why a lot of times they can have a harder time coming back onto food. But overall, both her and her boyfriend have great prey responses. They do very well. And then as far as husbandry goes, they are very similar to that of, like, say, a carpet python, where they're a little bit more forgiving and hardy when it comes to people figuring out their husbandry needs. Whereas something like a rainbow boa is much more receptive and reactive to getting their husbandry requirements exactly right. These guys can essentially handle it a little bit better. Not to say that you should go out and get a carpet python or a Woma python and just expect you to figure it out. You should still absolutely do your research, and watching this video is part of that, again. But these guys do very well. They do very well. An adult could work very well in, like, say, a 4x2 enclosure, which is kind of a good generic staple for a lot of species of snakes. In that, like, 4 to 6 foot range of an animal, that 4x2x2 enclosure works very well. They don't need as high humidity requirements as, say, a ball python or a boa constrictor. So in like 50 to 70 versus like 60 to 70 is the lowest you could go with a ball python. So a little bit less. They are fairly nocturnal, but they look amazing with full spectrum lighting, and they will absolutely bask, just like we have seen with our pine snake and our black-headed python, who has UVB on her enclosure, as well as several other snakes that we're finding. They do bask, they do seek out that UVA and UVB lighting, and they just look gorgeous under that full spectrum lighting. So I absolutely recommend you putting a bulb on there. But as far as heat goes, the mid 80s is a really good one. That's that more consistent temperature you'll find under those large logs in those burrows. A small, not super high basking spot, about 90 or so is a good basking spot for these guys. The one thing I will say that every single person and every single paper that I read in researching these Womas is that they love hides. They do love to feel secure. Once they do feel secure, they will absolutely, just like most species of snakes, take advantage of the whole area you give them. But they do like hides because they are a little bit more cryptic. They are a little bit more crepuscular, nocturnal. So during the day, they love to feel secure. So no matter what enclosure you end up going with, be it like a Christmas tree tub that Tree's in for right now, a 4x2, or even a much larger custom one, make sure that you have 1 or 2 larger hides for a full mature adult to be able to get in, both on the warm and the cool side. And then, some like heavier climbing branches and like the little half cork bark logs and tubes and things work very well for these guys. They're an amazing species of snake. I love them to death. They are so cool. I absolutely jump for joy at the ability to be able to keep these things when the opportunity arose for us, when we were approached if we wanted to get these pair. And I said, absolutely. Sorry, you might hear the reed frogs going in the background. But these guys are a great species of snake. They're not super common, but they have been in the trade for a while, and just like all Australian species, essentially what we have in the States and over in Europe is really all we got. We can't have any more new bloodlines because they haven't all exportation out of Australia is kaput, which is probably a good thing. But what that means is that we have a smaller genetic diversity to work with. And so always doing your best to go and find different people who work with the animal. But they are fairly affordable. They're fairly easy to keep. They don't get super large, even when compared to some of like the other Australian pythons, like the olives or the carpet pythons. Great animal. I wouldn't necessarily like an easy beginner one, but they do make a great pet reptile, and I would recommend for any of those looking for maybe the next step up as far as husbandry requirements and experience from, say, a ball python. I would absolutely recommend a Woma python like that because they don't get nearly as large. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. You can check out the whole playlist that I have of species spotlights. I like to do this with all the different species that I have, and eventually we'll be branching out to some other really cool ones and borrowing some animals from other people that I do know. If you have questions, comments, concerns, please let me know down at the bottom of this. You can check out the Instagram, Facebook, Patreon. I try to do TikTok, but I'm working on that, I promise. Hope everyone's having a great day, and we will check you next time.